Throughout the Middle Ages, we lack large-scale sculpture. There are a couple reasons for this. One is we lack the resources to create it, and the other is we lack the humanism of the ancient world of the Greeks and the Romans. We no longer have a real use for life-size figures that move in our own space, that are created in a naturalistic style. Instead, we've turned to spiritual depictions that are otherworldly. By the time we hit the Romanesque, we are at least going to begin to see a return to large-scale sculpture, but it's not going to be freestanding and it's not going to be naturalistic. It is instead going to be relief carving, such as we have right here. It's going to be flat, it's going to be linear, it's going to be very abstract. The figures are going to be elongated with tiny little heads, and it's going to be narrative. It is also, generally speaking, going to be very religious in nature and reflective of the ideas of St. Augustine and the city of God, still lingering into the 11th century. This is figure 1214 in our book. We do have a detail of this. I would like you to take a look at the Smart History video, which is going to cover the entire depiction. I would also like to have you focus on this in the context of the Middle Ages and the ideas of Augustine and his city of God, particularly the idea that we are all sinful and unworthy of God and that we need God's help to make it to heaven or to make it to paradise. Consequently, among the images that are frequently carved in the Romanesque at the entranceways of doors to churches would be depictions of the Last Judgment. In other words, to remind viewers that they need to be good in order to gain access to heaven after their death. And that would be true for this image, which is located at the Church of Autun. As a review of Romanesque sculptural style, we can look at figure 1213 in our textbook. It is a prophet with a scroll. We aren't sure if it's Jeremiah or Isaiah, so I think we're just going to call it a prophet. How do we know it's a prophet? Well, he's carrying a scroll, and that's what this is right here. A scroll form indicates a method of writing instead of a book form with pages, a long continuous piece of, in this case, probably animal skin that would have been used, that would have allowed people to write something and then to roll it up. So the ancient form of writing associated essentially with prophets. We also know this is a prophet because he seems to be going off into a visionary world, almost as if he's seeing, mystically seeing the prophecies come to life. His eyes are semi-closed and he seems to withdraw as he's presented to us in a kind of dance pose almost, with his legs crisscrossed. This is located in a church, the church at Mossack, France, that's on the pilgrimage routes, and we are not surprised by this now. This is a place where we could stop along the way, and this church is on the route to Santiago de Compostela in the northwestern portion of Spain. This image is located between the two central doors, and it is underneath an image depicting the second coming of Jesus. That is one of two subjects that tended to be used to decorate the main entranceways of pilgrimage churches. The first was the Last Judgment. You're going to look at that for Autun. The second is the second coming. The second coming, I'm going to suggest, does imply judgment. That's the end of time. But it also focuses on a kind of timeless image of Jesus in majesty. This underneath it is a depiction of a prophet who is foretelling everything of the future, and that is going to include Jesus and even beyond the time of Jesus here on earth. This is an image that is very, very linear. I can imagine that somebody drew it on the stone before it was actually carved. It is also highly two-dimensional. It's not really freestanding. This is not like the Romans or the Greeks. This figure is not going to be a figure that we can walk all the way around. So I'm going to call it a relief. If you want to call it a high relief, you could do that. But it still maintains a connection with the block of stone out of which it is being carved. It's still attached to the architecture. It is not freestanding. It is also not naturalistic. It is incredibly elongated. Look at this figure with its very small head and its agitation of the pose, almost as if it can't sit still because of the power of the visionary prophecies that this individual has revealed to us on the scroll. The surface, the lines of the garment also are incredibly energized. Even the beard, the lines on the beard of our prophet seem to be flowing like rivers. There is an incredible energy and surface pattern that is a strong part of this. So I'd like you again to be thinking of migrations, the energy and the surface pattern, the surface decoration, and the desire of filling every inch of the surface. In addition to that, for migrations, I'd like you to take a look at the critters. There are at least 4, and 2 down here and 2 up here. You might be able to see this one best. These are lions. What we have are animals that I can't call them interlace, but what I can say is that they're kind of laced into the relief-like carving. Okay. This is a closer look. Maybe you can see a little bit better our beastie over here, our lion. The lion was known as a guardian figure, so it would be associated with protection of the church. You can also get a closer look at our prophet and all of those very activated lines. We are on our way towards the development of independent sculpture, but that's not going to occur until the very late end of the Gothic period, and actually beyond that we're not going to get back to freestanding three-dimensional sculpture like the Greeks and Romans created until we hit the time of the Renaissance. I'd like to finish the Romanesque with a cloister, including 1210 in our textbook, the cloister from Mossack, the same church where we have that prophet that is carved in the center of the main doorway. A cloister is a vaulted walkway, usually 4-sided, surrounding a garden that is open to the sky. It is generally placed in the very center of a monastery, and it represents the kind of secluded life of the monks, because in this area, which is really the most private part of a monastery, this is where the monks would have been able to grow their vegetables, would have been a fountain placed in the very center of the open area, and they could have used that fountain for laundry, for shaving. It was a private space. The 4 vaulted walkways also, and we're looking on the right, both top and bottom, at what it would be like to walk down these, are very private spaces for meditation and prayer, and that is individual. So this represents to some extent the secluded nature of monastic life, of becoming a monk and joining a monastery. Why does that matter? Well, in the Middle Ages, certainly in the early part and up through the Romanesque, this is where learning was promoted. It was the monks who could read and write, and maybe some of the royals, but it wasn't available. Learning wasn't available to the general population. So the seclusion of education by the monks who to some extent control it is represented by the most secluded, most private part of the monastery, which is the cloister. There's another reason I want you to know this, and that is because the Philadelphia Museum of Art has reconstructed a cloister in its museum. You have an image of it, very small, but an image of it in the bottom center of the slide. You have a chance to actually see one, to get a little bit of a sense of what it was like to visit one. The one in the museum, of course, is closed, so it's not open to the sky. There's no grass, but it does have a fountain in the center. and it does give you the sense of isolation. And even in a busy museum, when you sit there with the trickling of the water fountain, you do get a sense that you are lost in time and removed from the other people who are traveling through the museum. This is a set of additional slides to give you a greater sense of what a cloister might look like. The Metropolitan Museum of Art also oversees the cloisters, which is not at the site of the Met, but at a distant location, but you can visit it. And it does reconstruct a series of cloisters at that particular site. So if you love the Middle Ages, try and visit the Met's cloisters. You can see from my aerial in the center top what a cloister would look like. There would be a fountain in the center. There would be patches where you could actually plant your crops, your veggies, for example. And then surrounding the open space on four sides would be the vaulted walkways where the monks could engage in prayer and in meditation. The most extreme example that I can give you of the secluded nature of the cloister and also of, to some extent, monastic life would be the monastery on a mountaintop in my slide in the upper left corner. At the very, very core of this monastery, which is hard to get to anyway, and very remote and very secluded, is the cloister. The cloister then, I think symbolically, more than any other part of the monastery, represents the remoteness of the lives of the monks from the ordinary people. The monks are the folks who help to pass on education. They also certainly contain within the walls of the monasteries the abilities to copy and produce books, and they also study religion. All of that remains somewhat remote from us, despite our beliefs in the faith. This is going to change when we get to the Gothic world, the 13th century. By the time of the 13th century, there will be increased opportunities for non-royals and non-monastic followers to engage in education, because we're going to find that there will be universities that will be built in cities. And I'm thinking in particular of Paris, but it will be happening other places as well. As education spreads, it will help to move us more towards the Renaissance.